Good morning, Boker Tov, Rechavia Nachlaot in Yerushalayim. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, Rabbi.
Thank you. Yesterday, we began Perek Chet, chapter 8 of Sha'ar, ha-Yichud ve'emunah. And we started to learn the subject of how HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the topic that we started to learn, that HaShem is just like anything that we know, obviously on a much, much higher level. HaShem has many sfirot and many worlds. And the example that we brought is from a nefesh, a soul that every person has, the soul itself and the different kochot, the different levels of energy of the individual. And by the person, it's the soul, the person is made up of all these different, is composite of many different factors. But by Hashem, even though there are many sfirot and worlds and different levels, it is not a contradiction at all with the fact that Hashem is Achdut Pshuta, is only one, Echad. Because by Hashem, it's unlike by a human being. For example, if you have milk, so it appears to be a simple and straightforward white liquid, but in reality, it's a complex mix of carbohydrates, protein, fat, and minerals. It's composite, but when we see it, it just looks like regular milk, like a white liquid. By HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the fact that there are many different points, many different aspects that express Hashem's greatness, by Hashem, it's all one. Achdut Pshuta, simple oneness. Towards the end of the class yesterday, we started to explain why it's almost impossible for a human being to understand Hashem's greatness. The Rambam says it in a couple of words, but the Alter Rebbe explains it, and today we're going to elaborate on that, Bezrat Hashem. The Rambam says, Ein koach ba'peh la'amro, there is no ability in a human being's mouth to say this. There's no ability for our minds to think it and for our ears to hear it. It's just impossible to understand Hashem. Now, I would like to start to explain the subject, and then we'll see it inside in the text. Hashem is called in Hebrew HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Freely translated, the Holy One, blessed be He. Hashem is Kadosh. Hashem is holy. What does it mean to be holy? So, a regular person that you ask what it means to be holy, especially in the Jewish religion, but also in any other religion, it's commonly, there's a misconception in what it means to be holy. Holy is usually translated as being lofty, not down to earth, and just all spiritual, so to speak, quote unquote. Holy. For example, in the Beit HaMikdash means the Holy Temple. What was the most important room in the Holy Temple? That was the Kodesh HaKadashim, the Holy of Holies. What was the only object in the Kodesh HaKadashim? That was the Holy Ark, the Aron HaKodesh. Why was it called the Holy Ark? Because inside there was the Luchot, the tablets, and the Sefer Torah, and it's in Senat Haman, the little jar of man, a couple of things, all inside the Aron HaKodesh. What was on top of the Aron HaKodesh? You had the keruvim, the cherubs, that looked like angels or birds, or the face of a male, the face of a female. And when Am Yisrael acted appropriately, the two cherubs would embrace. And when they did not act appropriately, then they were back to back. Does that seem to be appropriate for the holiest room in the world to have a male and a female embracing? That seems to be the most immoral and inappropriate thing to have inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. In fact, if you will look into other religions, and I believe also in the Christian religion, then priests and nuns officially don't marry. Because the way they claim to be, they say that marital relations is something which is impure, immoral, so to speak. But in the Kodesh HaKadashim, in the Holy of Holies, we had this image of a male and female embracing. So what does it mean? How could you call that holy? So in other religions, they claim to be holy. We won't talk about what really happens behind closed doors. But officially, they say, and it's at first glance, it sounds correct, that to be holy is to be removed from materialism, removed from physical cravings. But nonetheless, we see that in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, this was a symbol of Ahavat Hashem, love of Hashem for Am Yisrael, and love for one Jew to another. So what's the explanation? The explanation is that in Judaism, to be holy, kadosh, is a different explanation than the way it is the misconception, the way it is understood in the world, in the secular world, in the non-Jewish world. According to Torah, Hashem wants us to be holy. V'item kedoshim. We need to be holy. What does it mean to be holy? Holy means to bring kedusha to the world. Wow, that's a new concept. To connect the world, to elevate the world, that the spirituality should not be disconnected from the materialism, rather the contrary, that the world should be elevated, to bring kedusha, to bring holiness to the world. And that's why in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, that was the greatest symbol of holiness. When marital relations are done in a holy way, according to Shulchan Aruch, according to the Code of Jewish Law, then there is no greater way to elevate oneself and to draw down the greatest neshamot, the greatest souls from heaven down to this earth. That's like an episode that happened yesterday at Chabad of Rechavia. What happened in Chabad of Rechavia? I'm sitting in the office, in the storefront right on King George. And you can see it right behind me. That's the Bet Chabad Rechavia. And someone walks by and I have no idea who he is, sticks his head in the door and starts screaming at me. And he says, Chabad is this, Chabad is that, screaming. So I stood up with a smile and I said, did you have a chance to put on tefillin today? He said, no. How would you like to? He says, sure. So he walks in. It was pretty bold to have the courage to ask such a person, which you're standing in one of the most busiest streets in Israel, one of the busiest holy streets in the world. And anybody can walk by, and we have all kinds of interesting episodes that happen. But I said, you know what? Everything is divine providence. I said to myself, well, let's ask him if he wants to put on tefillin. So he put on tefillin, and then he couldn't stop praising Chabad and how we have the best Ahavat Yisrael, and he's from France, and apparently he's into Kabbalah. So it was like 15 or 20 minutes where he was going on and on and on, all these different gematrias, numerical values of this word and that word, and the Avraham Avinu, don't ask. He gave me a whole lecture on Kabbalah and what it represents, and he couldn't stop thanking me. It was almost like he turned around literally 180. And then afterwards I was thinking to myself, here you have a guy who, I don't know where he what his sources and teachings of Kabbalah, but he definitely has an excitement and a passion for the teachings of Kabbalah. And here he didn't even put on tefillin today. By the way, we arranged that he's going to be coming by in the next couple of days to bring his tefillin. He lives in a different neighborhood. He's going to bring his tefillin, and we're going to have them checked. He also doesn't have any money, so we're going to help him with that with pleasure. And so I thought to myself, here you have an individual who he seems to be pretty knowledgeable, at least on some level, in teachings of Kabbalah, but he didn't even put on tefillin. So where's the gap? Should it not be obvious that someone that's so well versed, on his level, in Kabbalah, shouldn't it be an obvious thing for him to put on the tefillin? And then I realized this concept. I realized that there are people who feel this gap between the quote-unquote spirituality of Yiddishkeit and between the practical mitzvahs that we need to do. When Am Yisrael accepted the Torah at Har Sinai, the first thing we said was, Naaseh, we will do. Then we said, V'nishma, we will hear, we will learn, we will contemplate, we will delve into the depths of the meaning of the Torah. But make no mistake, first there's Naaseh, the practical mitzvot, and then there's Nishma. Nishma is great, don't get me wrong. It's wonderful, Chabad, Chachma bin Adat. We have to understand, we have to learn the Torah. I have no problem with that. But the number one thing is the Nishma. And that's what Kabbalah is all about. It's called also Kabbalat Torah, receiving the Torah. That's where it's hidden. That's where the whole concept of Kabbalah comes from, to receive the Torah. That's where we're receiving it into ourselves, into our core. And so sometimes, unfortunately, people mistake the fact that we have the spirituality and we can learn a lot, but then there's a gap between that and the practical mitzvot. And in short, I tried to convey to this individual the message of the importance of observing the mitzvahs. In this case, tefillin, but any mitzvah. Obviously, the fact that you know a lot of Kabbalah, kol hakavod, that's wonderful. But there has to be a connection. You have to keep up the learning of the Kabbalah together with observing the mitzvahs. That's what means kadosh. That's point number one. Point number two in kadosh in Hebrew is related to another word. It's not the same root word, but it's related to another word in Hebrew. That's called havdalah. Havdalah means to separate. On Motzai Shabbat, after Shabbat leaves, then we say Havdalah, a special blessing, separating between Shabbat and the weekday. What does it mean to separate? When we separate, then we're clarifying the limitations. So on one hand, we want to mix with everyone and show our love and brotherly love. That's all wonderful. But at some stage, there has to be clear boundaries. The boundaries of Shabbat and the weekday. That's why we have Kiddush, to sanctify Kiddush, Kadosh. That's to sanctify the day of Shabbat. When we say the Kiddush on a cup of wine, we are separating the day of Shabbat from the weekday. And then when we say Havdalah after Shabbat, we're separating Shabbat from the next week. Now, that does not contradict the fact that the days of the week prepare for Shabbat, and Shabbat has a special effect on the next week. The days of the week and Shabbat are connected. In fact, every day, today is Tuesday, we said in davening, Hayom Yom Shlishi b'Shabbat. Today is the third day. The literal meaning of Shabbat means Shavua, a week. But on a deeper level, Shabbat means Shabbat. Every day has a little bit of Shabbat. And our obligation is, our challenge is to be able to connect Shabbat to the entire week and to uplift the week to a level of Shabbat. It shouldn't be just mundane to the side, but it should be uplifted. Like Shammai and Hillel, each one in their own way, would prepare every day something special for Shabbat. It's wonderful to blend holiness with the mundane realm. But first you have to have Havdalah. Kadosh is muvdal, Havdalah, separate. Just like Am Yisrael is the chosen nation, Am Yisrael is separated, Lahavdil ben Yisrael la'amim, to separate between Am Yisrael and the nations of the world. It's a wonderful thing to be Or Lagoyim, to be a light unto the nations. But first, before we blend with the nations, first we have to have the Havdalah. We have to have the pure understanding that we are different. We're not necessarily putting anyone down. It's a fact. We are different. HaShem chose us as being the chosen nation. Once we understand that, then we can try to influence others also to be uplifted. That's fine. But if we blur the boundaries, then God forbid there's a slippery slope that from going really down. As I heard just a few days ago, that the Chafetz Chaim said, the great tzaddik lived about 100 years ago, and he said, where did the reform movement start from? From one little thing. Right before the Musaf, we say Yakum Purkan Min Shemaya, and then we say another Yakum Purkan. Then we do the Misha Berach, and then Ashrei, or Avarachamim if we say Tachanu. And so they took out just one Yakum Purkan. They said, oh, we don't need it. Just to change the davening a little bit. Once we start changing, once we start blurring it's a slippery slope, and then God forbid, now they deny Kriyat Yamsuf, and they deny many, many fundamentals, unfortunately, of Yiddishkeit. So number one, Kadosh. We are a holy nation. We have to be muvdal. We have to be separated. Not, God forbid, to put anyone else down, just to understand that HaShem, Baruch HaShem, has chosen us to be the chosen nation. Once we understand that, then we can start influencing others. Or another context, once we understand that, then we can move on to the other interpretation of Kadosh, which means to blend, to bring down the Kedusha of Hashem into this world, to influence this world, to elevate this world, that it should be holy. And it should not remain just mundane, but it should be uplifted. So now we're going to get back to why Hashem is called HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem is Kadosh. Hashem is holy. Hashem is muvdal. Hashem is totally separated. And this is going to begin the explanation for why it's impossible for a human being to perceive the greatness of Hashem. Because Hashem, by virtue of who He is Kadosh, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He is muvdal, He is separated. The moment that we realize that Hashem is uplifted and separated and totally higher, a totally other realm than what we can perceive, then we can start to try to learn about Hashem, and we can try to bring down Hashem's godliness, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, into our lives and into the world. So let's try to read at least the beginning of the text, and tomorrow we'll continue to break it down on a more basic level of how we see how the Sefirot are broken down and why it is not a contradiction to the fact that Hashem is Hashem Echad, only one Hashem. Okay. So we are in the text towards the beginning of Perek Chet, of chapter 8, in the Sha'ar, ha-Yichud ve'emunah. And in the original text, it's page Pei, which corresponds to page 168. This is obviously in the regular text. And we are just about exactly 5 lines before the bottom of the page. First word of the line is an abbreviation. Ukemoshe katuv. We're just going to start a couple of words from yesterday, and then we'll continue a couple of more lines for today. Ukemoshe katav haRambam Zal, as the Rambam has written, shedavar zeh, that this concept, that HaShem is total oneness, and all of the sfirot are not a contradiction whatsoever to Hashem's oneness. Ein koach bapel amro. There is no power in the mouth to say it. In other words, our physical mouths can barely even say the words. I mean, we could say the words, but it's like saying something very, very silly, which no one understands, because we can't perceive this concept. And we don't have the power in our ears to hear these words. You can hear it, but you won't understand it. And not in the heart of man to understand and appreciate it properly. Now we'll continue for today. Ki ha'adam, for the human being, mitzayer b'sichlo, pictures in his mind, kol hamuskalot, all of the levels of intellect, sherotze lahaskil, that one wants to understand, ulahavin, and to comprehend. Here's the punchline: hakol kemot shehem bo. Everything the way it's within yourself. So us as human beings, when you want it, we're going to see soon a couple of examples, but when you want to understand the concept, you think a person naturally thinks about it the way it is within themselves. You want to understand what it means to drive, or you want to hear a story of someone driving. So you think about how you drive. And if you don't drive, or if you're a child, how you perceive how the adult that you're sitting in the back and the adult is sitting in the front, how the adult drives. So that's in your mind. In my mind, how do I perceive driving? That's how I could understand a story about someone who was driving. Kigon, for example, that a person may want to picture in their mind, mahut haratzon, the concept of will. I want something. So a child says, I want this, I want that. The truth is, even adults say that, of course, and but by a child, they're more clear about it sometimes. So they say, I want chocolate, I want a candy. So when you hear someone say, I want, so first we have to understand within ourselves, what does desire mean? So one can think to themselves how they perceive desire to be. How do I want? And then when someone comes to you and says, I want this, then you understand what it means to want. Or mahut chachma, the concept of wisdom. Or bina, or understanding. Or dat, or knowledge, which is an understanding which is emotional. It connects to the emotion. So someone wants to say, I have an idea, I have a flash, or I understand deeply, or please explain to me this concept. Or I have knowledge, or this guy has lots of knowledge. So the way we understand these expressions, these terminologies, is by understanding the way it is within us. Just to quote again what we said a few words ago, Hakol kemot shehem bo. All the way the individual understands these concepts and terminologies to be. Or mahut midat chesed v'rachamim, or the quality, the essence of chesed, kindness, v'rachamim, compassion, v'kayotze ben. And then the other example. Now he goes back to the same terminology as he said earlier. Hu mitzayer, one pictures in their mind, kulan, all of them, kemot shehem bo. just like they are within the person themselves. That's how we tend to understand a concept which is probably, which is a word that we may understand, and it can probably be something very, very deep. But even if it's deep, if there are one or two words here or there, we will relate to them, to these concepts, the way we understand them within ourselves. And then we can try to explain it to someone else. Firstly, understand it for ourselves, and then hopefully act upon that. Because we hear something, we understand it the way we personally perceive it to be. And you can have the same concept. One person is from one place of the world, speaks one language, another person's from another place of the world, a few people sitting in a lecture, and each person may understand it a little bit differently. Because each person perceives the idea to be the way they understand it, the way they're used to understanding it, the way perhaps they grew up in their home, this is how this word was used. And another person could understand it differently. The punchline is going to be that this is why it's impossible for a human being to understand HaShem properly. Because we understand, we say HaShem has chachma. So naturally we tend to say, okay, chachma is understanding. So probably HaShem has a brain, and HaShem has a skull, and probably he thinks with his brain, as if we understand how a brain works. But obviously, HaShem does not have any physical features, he's not a human being, he doesn't have a physical mind. So just from starting over there, we right away can understand that we have no clue into Hashem's chachma, what it means that Hashem is wise, Hashem is smart, Hashem is kind, what Hashem does in the world. It's totally beyond our imagination, even our wildest imaginations. And if we understand this, and this, we're going to elaborate on this Bezrat Hashem tomorrow, but if we can understand this, and we will understand, we will appreciate more how far we are, how distant we are, how removed we are from Hashem. And as we explained yesterday, that the further we are from Hashem, the closer we are. Because if we realize how great and how distant Hashem is, then we really can bring Him into our lives. If we think we're so great and we're so talented and we're so capable that we are befitting to be close to Hashem, then Hashem wants to be far from us. Hashem doesn't want to be close to an egotist. But when we are humble, then we connect to the essence of Hashem. And then we truly elevate ourselves, we become closer to Hashem. Thank you so much for joining us today. Bezrat Hashem, we look forward to seeing you tonight at 7:30, Seriously Happy, right here on Zoom and Facebook Live. And Bezrat Hashem tomorrow morning for the rest of the week. And of course, Friday is Kabbalah Cafe for Erev Shabbat Re'eh. All the best. Shalom, shalom. Have a great day.